So, lone rider here, out here in the woods by the river, and it's looking like a nice day. It's supposed to be raining, but the sky appears to be clearing, so we'll see what happens. But wanted to stop and make note of something that's been on my mind. Stuck in my craw, as they say, for the last few days. Since I heard a news, this was on 1010 Wins, a news report that New York City, I think it was part of Brooklyn, was looking at doing away with all free parking for automobiles. And several other reported changes. One was to lower the timing of the lights so that they were more in keeping with bicycles than car traffic. All of these changes, although ostensibly they are being pushed by people who, some of whom call themselves cycling advocates, the main thing these proposals seem to have in mind is that they seem to be anti-car. And, well, I think one of the biggest problems with traffic safety from a cyclist or even a motorcyclist standpoint, motorcycles are motorized, but they aren't automobiles in the normal sense, certainly not of being a large metal box, and they seem to be just as much at risk from drivers as cyclists, if not more so, when you consider that at least the drivers can hear them coming, but yet they somehow still manage to hit them. Yes, there is a problem with what I would call our car culture, if you want to put it in quotes. In some cases, blinding people to the true dynamic of traffic flow and the presence of things that aren't cars on the roadways. You start with a flawed premise, and everything from that's going to be flawed. So if you're just thinking the roads are only for cars, you're neglecting, a lot of the vehicles that are actually going to be out there, like bicycles, motorcycles, etc. And then therefore, your conduct will be correspondingly dangerous to them. And I think I'm not even sure if we could call it a car culture, because the name car culture fits because of its constant deferment to the automobile, but I think what it really is a rejection of cycling. And again, things that are somewhat similar, like motorcycling, in the sense of, it's not a car, even though, unlike a bicycle, it is a motorized vehicle. Bicycle, of course, is a vehicle, but not a motorized one, which is why you can take a bicycle where you couldn't take a motorized vehicle. Anyway, I'm understanding of the problems some people have with our so-called car culture. But what I'm not, and I don't think I, in all honesty, could say I've ever been, is anti-car. And I think what some cyclists, especially in urban areas where, they may not even own a car, although they probably, like everyone else, have had to, get a driver's license at some point. But, there are cities where people just don't own a car. They take an Uber, they take a taxi, they take mass transit, or they bicycle or walk everywhere. It doesn't necessarily mean they do this because they love cycling. It may be simply a pragmatic choice that it's more practical than owning a car, but it doesn't mean that they do it because they enjoy it and they're, cyclists at heart. And I think one of the problems that a lot of people have with cyclists is they think that we're anti-car, that we're out to force them to ride a bike or do whatever. And somebody who's genuinely a cyclist, I think that's furthest from the truth. I think somebody who considers themselves a cyclist who does it because they enjoy it rather than because, they happen to live in an urban environment that wasn't designed for cars, and a bicycle, they might ride a bicycle for transportation because it's practical, but if they were given any other alternative, they would stop being a cyclist in a heartbeat. I don't think you can call that person a cyclist in terms of, are they the operator of a bicycle? Yes, and maybe because they're using one on a day-to-day basis, they may have similar concerns and interests as, people who identify as cyclists. But I'm going to be honest, I'm not a cyclist because I have to bike. In fact, I own a car, and most cyclists outside of those living in extremely urban environments do own cars. There are some, I'm going to be honest, it's kind of cool to be able to get by without it. One winter I went the entire winter without using a car to get around. Actually, my battery died that year because it was sitting in my driveway. I was fortunate enough at the time that where I was working, I commuted by bike. I spent most of my time commuting to college by bike, and that was basically a 20-mile round trip. You know, but not everybody can do that or chooses to do that. You know what? Fair enough. It's their life. I think like I said, one of the problems a lot of people have with cyclists is they figure we're on like an anti-car crusade, and I think if you look at cyclists generally speaking, they have concerns about problems with cars, right? They have concerns with drivers who kill people due to negligence or carelessness or criminal conduct and get off scot-free. They have problems with roads that are designed not so much for cars, but that aren't designed with at least some consideration for the fact that cyclists are going to be there, right? It doesn't make sense to design roads for bicycles because we're not most of the traffic on the road. But it also doesn't make sense to design a road that does not take into account the fact that we exist, because we do exist, right? Bicycles aren't the majority of people on the road, and probably, at least in the U.S., never will be. But we certainly are here, and it doesn't make any sense to construct a road that makes it, let's say, more dangerous than necessary for us to ride on. Similarly with changes to road infrastructure, there's been a trend to put a lot of these poles near crosswalks and stuff in the middle of the friggin' road rather than where signs have normally been put since the beginning of time, which is off the usable road surface, off to the side. When you put obstacles in the middle of the road, it makes them more dangerous anyway, but this is even worse because where they put them is right where you ride your bike. And every time I see one of those, to me, it's an admission that the town traffic planners don't acknowledge our existence. And that's a problem. And, whether it's due to the car culture or not, I honestly don't know. But I think we can safely say that there are some problems with most people's understanding of the road dynamic and traffic flow, especially in relationship to cyclists, if they are not themselves cyclists. And since if they're not themselves cyclists, usually they're going to be drivers. I think that's why we refer to it as a car culture, whether it really is or not. Like I said, the name car culture fits, I think, as a constant deferment to the automobile. Is it really a car culture? We know there is a car culture in the United States, but I don't know if that's the proper term for this aspect of the situation on the roads. However, for whatever reason, there are a lot of cyclists who are perceived as anti-car. And I guess what I wanted to point out, sorry for the rambling digression, but what I wanted to point out is doing things that make people even more likely to think you're anti-car when most of the people in this country drive compared to the number who bicycle, or I should say bicycle either exclusively or bicycle and drive, but compared to the number of people who just drive compared to the number of people who are cyclists, whether they also drive or not, is huge, right? Most people aren't cyclists, at least avid cyclists, regular cyclists. Most people are drivers, or at least passengers in cars. And I think alienating those people and trying to be like, doing something that will convince them that you want to attack part of their life isn't going to help them see eye to eye with you and see your point about whatever safety changes or whatever to the road that you're trying to make. And so when I see suggestions like, let's get rid of all the free parking because it subsidizes the car culture, what exactly is that going to do to improve road safety? It would be one thing if they said this road is too narrow for people to park on safely because it narrows the street, obstructs visibility, whatever. Okay, fair enough. But to simply say your problem is with free parking because it basically panders to the motorists. So are you operating on spite now? Is your concern road safety and improving the lot of America's cyclists, or is your concern simply being a dick? Excuse my French. And I'm going to be honest, there's a lot of cycling advocates who come across to people who don't bicycle, and even sometimes to people who do, like me, they come across as dicks. They come across as people who, virtually all the cyclists I know personally are very tolerant and open-minded and, more or less free thinkers. But then you have these people who seem to be convinced that their job is to go on a crusade against other people. Now, I understand people who want to go on a crusade against bad drivers, illegally parked landscaping trucks, drivers who are drunk, drivers who are high, drivers who are on the cell phone, drivers who are driving illegally with no license. I'm against all of those things, and I wish the police would pull every single one of those people out of their cars and put cuffs on them, okay? And chop their license up into little pieces and bury it in the town landfill. I really do. So I understand if you're against that sort of thing. But if you're just against cars, period, you need to wake up, because there's always going to be cars. And, we're not going to get every single person to become a cyclist. And frankly, even if we do get more people interested in cycling, it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to give up their cars. I bicycle and I own a car. Unfortunately, it's something that I consider at this point to be useful. It would be nice if I could get by without one, but it's kind of awkward to ride the hour and a half it would take me to get to the archery range with all my gear on my back for shooting my longbow. I'm just not going to, that's just not feasible at this point. So if all you do is cycling, yeah, that's fine. But even there, when I was biking more for transportation than I am now, when I would go to certain rides like the 5-borough in New York, which I used to do a lot, or the Bucks County, metric century in the covered bridges ride in Pennsylvania. I wasn't going to ride my bike to Pennsylvania and then ride 100 kilometers and then ride home and then get up to go to work the next day. No, I drove there. Okay. And there were some of the riders in the group who either didn't own cars or, whatever. They hitched a ride with another rider in their car. Okay. That's kind of what happens. So, even people who are avid cyclists at some point may own a car, may not be able to get by without it, or may simply be convinced that it's useful. I agree. It's nice to be able to be like, well, I can get by without a car if I have to. But the point is, it's also, there's a usefulness to cars. And I think trying to, they're useful. They're they have a purpose. And trying to be anti-car, I think, if you want to be something, be pro-bike, but don't be anti-car. Okay? Be anti-bad driver, be anti-reckless driver, be anti-poor use of the car, if you will, but don't be anti-car, period. Because all you're doing is telling other people who associate that with the rest of us as cyclists that cyclists are assholes. And excuse my language, but all you're doing is alienating people who we probably would otherwise have common ground with. Nobody likes being endangered by a drunk driver or somebody on the phone or somebody who's had 19 convictions for DUI or somebody who's driving without a license because they got it taken away because the last time they got in a car they killed a family of 4, etc. I think whether you're talking about drivers or other cyclists or whatever, pretty much everybody has a problem with those people, right? So, there's a lot we have in common, I think, with the drivers. And I think that, and some of us are drivers ourselves. So let's not be anti-car. Let's be pro-cycling if you want to be anything. But I hear these proposals like this one in New York. Well, let's get rid of the free spaces because we want to stick it to the car people. And what exactly is that going to do except give those car people more of a chance, more of a reason to hate cyclists? Do you think, are you trying to make things worse for cyclists by making us all look like jerks to everybody? Because it seems to me that's what you're doing. So I would say to cycling advocates and anybody who, has concerns about roadway issues relevant to cycling, keep in mind, you catch more flies with honey, as the old saying goes. Yes, by all means, stand up for your rights and your safety and object strenuously to people doing illegal, stupid crap that they shouldn't be doing because it's dangerous to life and limb. Take a stand against drunk drivers, people on cell phones, people driving illegally, whatever. But don't be anti-car because you're not going to get very far in a country where most people drive. And if anything, all you're going to do is poison their minds against the rest of us who bicycle and aren't anti-car. We're anti-reckless driver, but we're not anti-car. And, I guess that's the nicest way I can put it. Don't be a jerk, right? And it's surprising to me how often people think that standing up for something, rightly or wrongly, means you have to be a jerk about it. You don't, okay? You don't. And, again, legitimate roadway safety issues are one thing. Saying, well, we got to do everything we can to make it difficult for people who drive. You do realize they already have to pay exorbitant taxes and fees, right? You do realize they're already much more heavily regulated than your bicycle and you are, right? Yeah. Now, I agree. We should do more to enforce the rules against people behind the wheel who break the rules, who do unsafe things, like be drunk, like be on a cell phone, like not signal a turn. That's a very different matter from saying you want to just go on a crusade against the idea of somebody driving a car. All right. I think this has more to do with runaway, radical, lunatic environmentalism than it does with cycling and roadway safety. And just so we're clear, this doesn't represent all cyclists. The danger is that it convinces people that it does. People hear proposals like this talked about supposedly from the perspective of somebody who considers himself a cycling advocate, and the easiest conclusion to come to is that, well, cyclists are a bunch of jerks. And we're not. And those people don't speak for us. But let folks know that those people don't speak to you. Make that point. Make that point that you're pro-cycling, but you're not anti-car. Lone Rider out. And, just something to keep in mind. You can work to promote cycling without cutting other people down and trying to make life difficult for other people, and without being a jerk about it. Rock on, stay safe.